They always told me I wasn't good enough, not sharp enough to compete, not strong enough to succeed, at least not in the way they approved of. I used to stay quiet. I used to fold. But today, I came back. In the bag I carry, there's a truth my family was never prepared to face. And when they realize who actually leads the biggest project of their lives, that truth will hit harder than any battlefield I've been on. This is not a story of revenge. It's the story of a daughter who took a different path, was dismissed for years, and now returns not to apologize, but to command. They say time heals everything, but they never tell you what it's like to walk back into a place where time never moved on. My name is Eliza Moore. I'm 28 years old, and as I pulled into the gravel driveway of my childhood home in tiny Fairfield, Montana, my hands refused to stop trembling. Not from fear, not exactly, but from the weight of everything that had passed in the 5 years since I last saw this place. The last time I stood here, I was a fresh-faced officer cadet. Today, a colonel insignia was tucked deep in my duffel bag, hidden like a secret. To my parents especially, my father, the military, was a sidetrack, a holding pen for people who didn't make it in the real world. In their world, success had a very specific uniform, boardrooms, business degrees, and well-connected handshakes. Anything outside of that was simply invisible. And for 5 years, I let myself be invisible. The house looked exactly as it had the day I left, white paint peeling near the window frames, the porch light flickering slightly as if caught between duty and surrender. I stepped out of the car and inhaled the cool mountain air, sharp with pine and memory. Inside, nothing had changed. Same framed photos of birthdays, long past same floral-patterned furniture, worn thin by time and routine. Even the smell was the same, a mix of cinnamon pine sol and something faintly metallic that always reminded me of my father's tool shed. "Eliza, you made it," came the voice from the kitchen, my mother's voice. Neutral, not warm, not cold, just practiced. She didn't come out to greet me. She never did. "I'll set an extra place," she called, as if I were a last-minute guest-crashing dinner. I dropped my bag silently by the stairs and made my way through the hall, brushing my fingers along the wood-trimmed walls like I used to as a kid. I stopped at the living room entrance, half expecting to hear laughter from the past, but it was only silence and stale air. "He'll be here soon," Mom said as I walked into the kitchen. She didn't look up from the pot she was stirring. "Your brother. He's been promoted again, senior project manager. Can you believe it?" I could absolutely believe it. "That's great," I murmured, voice low but steady. It wasn't the first time she sang that same praise, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. She went on babbling about his new house outside Missoula, about how Megan, his wife, had just started a new position in corporate law. All the markers of success lined up like trophies she could dust every weekend. Not once did she ask me how I'd been, where I'd been, what I'd done. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to go put some things away." I climbed the staircase slower than I needed to, not from fatigue, but from the weight of the memories pressing in. My old bedroom door creaked as I pushed it open, and there it was, a perfectly preserved time capsule of my teenage years. Trophies from track and field, debate medals, my acceptance letter to Stanford taped to the bulletin board like a museum relic, but not a single trace of the life I'd lived since leaving. No photo of my commissioning ceremony, no ribbons from overseas deployments, not even the article the Gazette had run when I was awarded the Army Cyber Shield of Merit. To them, that part of me didn't exist. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ceiling, the glow-in-the-dark stars still clinging there from high school. I had once dreamed of NASA, of systems and code and discovery. My parents had other plans: business school, corporate strategy, someday inheriting the family name at Valor Tech Solutions. But I chose the ROTC scholarship. And when I told them, my father looked at me like I had spat in his face. "The military is for people with no options, Eliza," he said. "You're smarter than that." I reached for the closet and unzipped the garment bag. My dress blues stared back at me like a silent witness. Rank, medals, years of blood code and bone-deep grit. I had earned every thread of it. Tomorrow, Valor Tech would host its annual leadership summit. The CEO, Andrea Coulson, would be visiting personally to review project progress. And what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was no longer just Eliza the dropout daughter. I was the lead military liaison for the Army's $1.4 billion cyber sentience contract, the same contract ValorTech had just secured. I ran my finger across the silver eagle at my collar. At 28, I was one of the youngest colonels in Cyber Command history. But tonight, I would eat quietly at my parents' table. I would let them talk over me, compare me, disregard me. Because tomorrow everything would change. The doorbell rang downstairs. He's here. My brother. I rose slowly and squared my shoulders, not for war, but for something far more brutal. Dinner with family. The last step creaked beneath my foot as I descended the staircase, a sound I used to jump over as a teenager to avoid waking my parents. Now it echoed like a memory that refused to stay buried. I could already hear his voice before I saw him. Gregory, full of certainty, the kind of self-assurance that only ever grows in the echo chamber of constant praise. The golden child, the heir apparent. He was standing by the front door when I entered the dining room, his wife Megan beside him, like an accessory, sleek polished, and always camera ready. "Hey there, stranger," Gregory said with a smirk. "Didn't think you'd make it. Long time." I gave him a nod. Long enough. We shook hands like polite strangers forced to play siblings for the sake of a meal. His grip was firm, performative. Mine was steady, trained. I could already see him trying to measure me the way one sizes up an opponent on a chessboard. But I wasn't playing games anymore. "Dinner's ready," my mother called brightly, her voice an octave higher now that Gregory had arrived. "Tiffany's here too. She just got in." Tiffany, my cousin, the only one in this house who never looked at me like I was broken. When I saw her, she smiled genuinely and gave me a brief hug that didn't feel staged. "It's good to see you, Eliza," she whispered. "You look centered." "Feels good to be home," I lied. We sat around the old mahogany dining table, the one where countless arguments had been disguised as family conversations, where every meal came served with an extra side of comparison. My father, Albert, took his usual seat at the head still in business slacks, checking his emails like always tapping his phone, beneath the tablecloth, as if he was orchestrating a symphony none of us were allowed to hear. The food smelled like memories: roast chicken, garlic potatoes, steamed carrots with honey glaze. My mother served Gregory first, then Megan. Me. She slid the dish toward me without even meeting my eyes. So Gregory began already owning the space, wanted to share the good news with everyone. Got promoted again, senior project manager as of last Monday. My mother clapped gently, eyes shining. "That's my boy. You always land on your feet." My father actually looked up from his phone. "That's impressive. Andrea doesn't hand out leadership roles easily. You must have really stood out." I chewed a carrot slowly. The bitterness lingered. Gregory beamed. "I'm heading the same cyber initiative we've been struggling to launch for 2 years. Andrea says my energy might be the push it needed." I nearly choked on my bite. "That cyber initiative." The same one tied directly to the military contract, the same one I would be reviewing in less than 12 hours. The irony was almost too sharp to swallow. "Sounds important," I said coolly. "Oh, it is," he grinned. "We've got some military liaison coming in to oversee the final phases. Probably just a desk major who'll nod through everything and sign off." I sipped my water slowly. My mother leaned in like she was revealing a state secret. "Gregory's even managing 12 direct reports now, can you imagine? And 2 of them are older than him. But they respect him because he delivers results." I smiled faintly. "That's good to hear." She turned toward me, then finally, "And what about you?" Eliza still in the same position. "More or less," I replied, voice even. "Still, Captain Wright?" My father asked vaguely, never quite grasping the rank structure. "Something like that," I said, cutting my meat with calculated calm. Gregory chuckled. "Must be weird just following orders your whole life. I'd go crazy in a job like that." Tiffany gave him a look, but he continued. "Corporate's tougher than people think. You have to make your own decisions, build your own path, not just salute and obey." I nodded. "Sounds stressful." He grinned wider. "Well, not for me. I was built for it." "Of course you were." My mother jumped back in, now cooing about Tiffany's new condo downtown, 3 bedrooms, mountain view, perfect resale value. My achievements weren't even ghosts at this table. They were air, unseen, unmentioned. When I finally looked up from my plate, I caught Tiffany watching me. Her eyes said everything her lips couldn't say in front of our parents. "I heard the CEO is visiting tomorrow," I said, mostly to shift the air in the room. My father nodded. "Andrea Coulson. She's flying in for the summit. Big deal. We're doing a full presentation. There's even an announcement about the new military contract." "Is someone from the Pentagon attending?" I asked innocently. Supposedly, Gregory scoffed. "Probably some out-of-touch lifer who's just there to tick boxes." I stared at my glass, the ice spinning like a slow countdown. "You know, my mother said I always hoped you'd end up at Valortech too, before the detour." I said nothing. She had so much potential, she added like I wasn't sitting right there. Her teachers used to say she could run a company one day. I pushed my food around in silence. No one asked about the training I'd led, the missions I'd been deployed for, the soldiers I'd mentored. Gregory leaned back. 10 years from now, I'll probably be running a division, maybe even VP. Where do you see yourself by then, sis? I looked him straight in the eye and said, right where I need to be. He laughed. My mother smiled at his confidence. My father glanced at his phone. They still didn't see me, but tomorrow they would. They would see everything. And I wasn't sure which would hit harder, the pride or the guilt. That night, sleep did not come easy. I lay on the same mattress I had slept on as a teenager beneath the same quilt my grandmother had stitched when I was 10. The ceiling above still bore the faded glow-in-the-dark stars I'd placed there after a school science fair when the universe felt like something I could reach with just a telescope and a dream. But dreams were complicated things. I rolled over, unable to shake the chill in the room, not from temperature, but from memory. The kind of cold that lives in the cracks between words, unsaid and love withheld. My eyes settled on the bookshelf across from me, still filled with outdated yearbooks and dusty trophies, academic certificates framed with care. But nowhere was there a single sign of what had come after. Not the day I graduated basic training, not the day I commissioned as a second lieutenant, not the article in The Defender about the cyber operation I led. The military to them was a detour, a phase, an error. And I remembered the exact night it all began. I was 19. I came home with a folder in my hand and excitement burning in my chest. The ROTC scholarship acceptance letter was crisp, full of promise and possibility. We sat at this very table. My mother was peeling potatoes. My father reviewing spreadsheets on his laptop. Gregory was still in high school watching sports in the next room. "I got it," I said, trying to contain my smile. "Full scholarship, ROTC, tuition, stipend, training." My father looked up, slowly, coldly. "The military," he asked, as if I had announced I was joining a circus. I nodded. "It covers everything, and it's not just service. I'd go into cyber defense, real work, purposeful work." He closed his laptop, folded his arms. "Eliza," he said, voice low, "that path is for people with no other options, for kids who don't have futures handed to them." "But I want this," I insisted. He looked at my mother, who was already shaking her head. "We thought you were going to Stanford Business. Remember you said—" "No," I said softly. "You said that, I just never said no." That night, I went to bed with silence in place of congratulations. Back in the present, I sat up in bed and opened the drawer by my nightstand. Inside was a photograph I had tucked into a book years ago, hoping it might one day be seen. It was from my commissioning ceremony. I was in full uniform, proud, standing tall. Beside me, Tiffany, the only one who had shown up. My parents had sent a message that morning, some emergency at work. Gregory didn't even reply. They framed Gregory's internship letter at Valortech. Mine stayed in an inbox no one opened. I traced the edges of the photo with my thumb, then reached for my uniform in the closet. Slowly, carefully, I ran my fingers over the fabric. The weight of it, literal and symbolic, was grounding. I wasn't that 19-year-old girl anymore. I had led operations in Germany, embedded with cyber teams in South Korea. I'd briefed generals twice my age, designed security architecture used across entire military infrastructures. I didn't need their approval anymore, but a part of me still wanted them to see, not to win their love, just to be seen. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 3:00 a.m. I lay back down and stared at those fading stars, the ones I used to dream under. Tomorrow I would walk into their world in full uniform, and they would realize I didn't disappear. I had been rising this whole time. The morning of reckoning arrived like a blade drawn in silence. I stood before the mirror in my childhood bedroom, no longer just Eliza the forgotten daughter, no longer the ghost they couldn't categorize. I was Colonel Eliza Moore. My uniform had never felt heavier or more rightful. Every pin, every stitch, every ribbon was earned, not just in war zones and strategy rooms, but in silence, in being underestimated, in surviving the dullest kind of battle, being invisible to the people who were supposed to love you most. The silver eagle glinted as I fastened it to my collar. I glanced at my reflection one last time. Poised, precise. No hint of the girl who once begged to be seen. The drive to Valor Tech took 14 minutes. Each mile carried me closer to a reckoning neither of us had asked for, but I would not run from. The parking spot reserved for military liaison, Aegis Project, had been marked just this week. I pulled in, stepped out, and I could feel it immediately. This was my ground now. Security at the front entrance stood straighter the moment they saw the uniform. "Good morning, Colonel," one said, visibly startled by my age. "ID, please." I handed over my Pentagon badge and clearance documents. His eyes widened, then snapped to full attention. "Of course, ma'am. You're cleared for direct access to executive level. Would you like an escort?" "That won't be necessary," I said calmly. "I know where I'm going." And I did. I had studied every blueprint of the facility in preparation, every access point, every floor. As the glass doors slid open, conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. A colonel walking through civilian corporate space is rare. A young one, rarer still. A young woman practically unheard of. But no one stopped me. They all moved. The elevator was silent. My reflection in the metal door looked like someone I almost didn't recognize. Steel in her eyes, purpose in her spine, resolve in every breath. The moment the door slid open at the executive level, the world tilted. Gregory was the first to see me. He was standing with his tablet, half reviewing notes, half basking in his own aura until his eyes met mine. Confusion, recognition, then panic. "Eliza," he blinked, jaw stiffening. Why are you wearing?" "Morning," I said, professional, sharp. He looked at the insignia on my shoulder as if it burned him. Are you the liaison?" I didn't answer, because just then our father rounded the corner with two senior directors. He was mid-sentence, his voice, that familiar mix of confidence and practiced charm, until he saw me. He stopped. Words died. His expression morphed like a glass shattering inward. "Eliza," he said slowly, brows furrowing. "What is this? Why are you in uniform?" I nodded politely. "Good morning, sir." "Sir," he echoed, looking around nervously. "What are you—" "I'm just on my way to the conference room. The meeting starts in 17 minutes. Behind him, one of the directors stepped forward and offered a hand. "Colonel Moore, I'm Barbara Jenkins, Legal Affairs. We weren't told you'd be attending in person. It's an honor." The silence that followed was exquisite. Barbara had just confirmed everything. My father turned a shade paler. Gregory looked like he might actually faint. "I believe the CEO will address everything shortly," I added smoothly, "if you'll excuse me." And I walked past them, shoulders straight, eyes forward. I didn't look back, but I could feel it. Everything was beginning to unravel, and they hadn't even entered the room yet. The conference room smelled like money. Polished oak, leather chairs, fresh coffee and glass pitchers lined the sideboards like silent witnesses to power being negotiated. I took my seat at the far end of the table where the nameplate read Call, E. Moore, Department of Defense, Aegis Project Liaison. I placed my notes down. The room began to fill. Some greeted me with respectful nods. Some froze mid-step, trying to connect my face with the insignia on my shoulder. Some ignored me too, caught in their corporate rhythm to notice the shift in gravity. But they all felt it. My father and brother arrived a few minutes later, whispering to one another in the doorway before taking seats farther from me. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Their discomfort lingered in the air like static before a storm. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the doors opened again. and in walked Andrea Coulson, CEO of ValorTech, brilliant, exacting, a woman known for seeing through pretense like glass. She scanned the room with clinical sharpness until her gaze landed on me. And then she smiled. "Eliza," she said, walking directly toward me. "Colonel Moore. I thought we were connecting by video today." I stood to greet her, shook her hand firmly. "I happened to be in town. Thought I'd attend in person." "Well," she said, genuinely pleased, "you've just elevated the stakes of this meeting. Everyone, if you haven't had the pleasure, this is Colonel Eliza Moore, our Pentagon liaison for Project Aegis." The room shifted. I heard pens pause, breaths held. My father's face, drained of all color. Gregory blinked like someone just pulled the rug from beneath his entire future. Andrea continued with her signature precision. "Colonel Moore will be overseeing integration alignment, budget compliance, and security vetting for this contract. Final authority on implementation flows through her office. She brings a level of technical expertise the DoD rarely entrusts to a single liaison." She glanced around, her words deliberate. "You'd do well to listen carefully." And just like that, every eye in the room adjusted, not toward the CEO, not toward my father, but toward me. The meeting began with project updates. One by one, department heads presented their slides. One by one, they turned to me for input, for approval, for direction. I spoke with clarity, focused, no bravado. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. When someone misquoted a protocol number, I corrected it gently but precisely. When a cybersecurity engineer proposed a shortcut that would have created a backdoor, I shut it down immediately with a reason, a case study, and a solution. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was doing my job. But across the table, I could see my father sitting very still, as if realizing I hadn't just done all right for myself. I had exceeded every expectation he never gave me. Then came Gregory's turn. He stood awkwardly, cleared his throat. As team lead for UI integration, he began, "We've streamlined the interface pipeline to support multi-tiered architecture for the incoming protocol phase." He clicked through slides too fast. He stumbled over acronyms I had helped develop. I listened, arms folded. And when he finished, I smiled slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Moore. Quick question, your architecture includes the 4.3 adaptive shell. What mitigation layer are you implementing for predictive override threats?" His eyes widened. I believe we're using the dynamic key sync module. Version 1.9, I asked. He nodded hesitantly. "Then you have a vulnerability window of 16 seconds under deep stress scenarios. That needs a patch before compliance sign-off." He looked like the air had been sucked out of him. I'll follow up on that." "Good. Please submit a revised proposal to the DoD dashboard by Friday." Andrea nodded in approval. "Well caught, Colonel." And in that moment, in that boardroom, surrounded by people who once doubted me, I became undeniable. Not because I crushed my brother's ego, not because my father sat in stunned silence, but because I had finally stopped shrinking. I didn't need their permission to take up space. I had earned it. When the meeting ended, I gathered my notes calmly. No celebration, no smile. I wasn't here for revenge. But the room didn't move the same way it had before. Voices were lower, glances sharper. People who once passed by without a second look now nodded first. Respect is a strange thing. Sometimes it arrives like thunder, sometimes like silence that finally listens. "Colonel Moore," Andrea said as she approached. "Do you have a moment to meet the senior team? I think it would be good to connect in person since we usually only deal through channels." I nodded. "Of course." She placed a hand on my shoulder, lightly casual but unmistakably respectful. The remaining directors formed a small half-circle around us. "This is Colonel Eliza Moore, Andrea," said lead liaison for Project Aegis. Her fieldwork on quantum layer cyber deterrence is what shaped our core framework. Frankly, we owe the project's trajectory to her. The VP of Engineering, Bailey, stepped forward. "Wait, Moore," he said slowly, "as in Albert Moore." Andrea turned her head slightly. "Albert's last name is Moore too." And then it happened. That split-second pause, the one you can't unsee once it begins. Her eyes met mine. The math started calculating. "Are you two related?" It wasn't hostile, it wasn't accusatory, but it was loaded. I didn't flinch. My instinct was to speak to clarify on my own terms, but before I could answer, a familiar voice cut in behind me. "She's my daughter." The words landed like a dropped glass, soft but irreversible. I turned slowly. My father stood just a few steps away. No more hiding, no more silence. Andrea blinked. Albert, I had no idea. He hesitated, voice awkward. "I didn't either. Not until this morning. I mean, I knew she was in the military, but not this." His admission wasn't just personal. It was public. Every person in that room heard he didn't know. Not because I hadn't told him, but because he had never asked. Andrea looked back at me. Her expression shifted not with doubt, but with something more nuanced. Curiosity, respect, and maybe quiet judgment. "How long have you been assigned to this project?" "6 months," I answered simply. "And you've been overseeing the contract, without anyone here knowing your family ties." "That's correct. I was assigned based on merit. General Grant made the placement." Andrea nodded slowly. "And you disclosed everything up the chain as protocol requires. Every step. I even requested no preferential access to company personnel databases to avoid conflict. The VP of Finance chimed in surprised. "So you deliberately stayed off radar?" I nodded, to ensure there would be no perception of favoritism. My relationship to Mr. Moore is not relevant to the integrity of my role. My father stood stiffly now, shoulders squared more from habit than conviction. "She didn't tell us," he said quietly. We didn't know how far she'd come." Andrea looked at him, then at me. "She shouldn't have had to," she said simply. The room stilled. No one dared break the silence. Then Andrea smiled, not with mockery, but with something rare in corporate settings. Genuine admiration. "You've managed to balance protocol, discretion, and performance," she said. "That's not easy, especially not with this many eyes on a billion-dollar contract." She looked at the others. "This is the kind of leader I want in the room, period." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not victory, not vindication, just air, clean and earned. Gregory stepped forward slightly, finally finding his voice. "So you've been monitoring us this whole time." "I've been reviewing the project," I corrected gently. "Not spying, and not you, the work." His jaw tightened. "You let us think. I didn't let you think anything. You assumed." That landed hard, because it was true. They had built a picture of me from silence and filled it with their own disappointment. And now the image was cracking. 1 hour after the reveal, I was in another room. Smaller, sharper, less wood grain charm, more steel and silence. Only 6 people sat around that table. Myself, Andrea, 2 vice presidents, and my father and brother. This wasn't a boardroom anymore. This was a war table. "Colonel Moore," Andrea began. "As agreed, we'd like your direct evaluations on each segment of the Aegis pipeline. Our internal teams will adjust based on your findings." "Understood," I said, opening the binder in front of me. "I'll go by structure rather than hierarchy." She nodded. "Proceed." I started with encryption architecture. Clear, efficient, minor risks. The VP of Engineering looked relieved. Then came database integrity protocols. Strong in theory, but code-lagged in simulation. Action plan, weekly stress tests. No one pushed back. Then interface integration. Gregory's department. I paused for one deliberate second, just long enough for everyone to feel it. User interface testing has been inconsistent, I began. Simulated responsiveness fell below DoD threshold on 3 of 5 test environments. Gregory's face tightened. "That's likely an early build." I raised a hand gently. All tests were conducted on the most recent commit, version 6.21. He went silent. I continued flipping to the second page. "There's also an issue with how your team handles input validation under cyber attack scenarios. The system doesn't hard fail. It loops." He shifted uncomfortably. "That's being patched. It's been marked in progress for 5 weeks, and without a fail-safe, the risk isn't just code side. It's operational." Andrea leaned forward. "Impact if left unresolved." I met her eyes. "It compromises user response under field stress. The interface might freeze mid-operation, which in battlefield conditions could be fatal." A long, cold silence. Then Gregory spoke quiet tight. Are you seriously suggesting my team poses a national threat? I didn't blink. I'm stating that in its current state, your module is non-compliant with DoD standards. It needs restructuring, not denial. Andrea tapped her fingers together. Eliza, she said slowly, what's your recommendation? I turned to the next tab in the binder, the red one. Reassign partial load to backup team in Boston. Freeze rollout of version 6.3 until issue is confirmed patched. And Gregory's team enters a remediation cycle for 14 days, monitored by a DoD side lead. Gregory's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. You can't just override our schedule. I already have, I said calmly. Authority was granted with my role. He looked to Andrea. You're going to let her gut our work. Andrea didn't look away. I'm going to let her protect a $1.2 billion contract from failure. And that was it. Gregory leaned back, stunned. My father looked between us, between his legacy and his reality, and said nothing. Because what was there to say? This wasn't dinner table bickering. This was command. I flipped the binder shut. The next review will be in 72 hours. If measurable progress isn't evident by then, Boston takes full integration control. Andrea nodded, understood, and just like that, I became the voice they had to answer to. Not because I demanded it, but because I'd earned it. He asked to see me alone. His voice was quieter than usual when he said it. Not an order, not a demand, just a request. Do you have a minute? He asked, standing awkwardly outside the executive suite. I nodded and followed him into the one place I had never truly been invited, his office. It was just as I imagined. Tidy, framed certifications, a Valor Tech banner, a photo of Gregory at the 2021 Innovation Gala Center frame, polished desk, nothing out of place. Nothing, except for me. He stood by the window looking out at the parking lot like there might be a battlefield waiting in the trees. I remained near the door, waiting. He didn't turn. It's strange, he finally said, voice rough. This morning I woke up thinking I knew exactly who I was, what I'd built, what my family stood for. He exhaled, and now I'm not sure anymore. I didn't answer, because it wasn't my place to soften this for him. He turned slowly. For the first time, his eyes actually looked at me. Not through me, not around me, at me. You're impressive, he said. 2 words. Small, but heavy. I didn't expect to say that today. Why not? I asked. He blinked. Because for years I thought you were lost, adrift, wasting what you had. I tilted my head, and what did I have? He swallowed. Potential. I smiled gently. No, Dad. What I had was a different compass. He sat down slowly in the leather chair across from his desk, gesturing vaguely toward the seat across. I took it. For a few seconds we said nothing. Just the soft hum of the building's ventilation filled the silence. I owe you an apology, he said finally. Not for disagreeing with your choices, but for dismissing them, for assuming they had no weight just because I didn't understand them. I looked at the bookshelf behind him. Not a single book on military history or leadership outside business. It had never been his world. I didn't need you to agree with me, I said quietly, but I needed you to try to see me. He nodded. I didn't. I saw a version of you I built from my own fears, from what I thought success looked like. I leaned back, letting the quiet settle. I don't need your pride now, Dad, I said, but I needed your belief then. He closed his eyes for a moment. I know. The honesty in his voice almost startled me. I kept waiting for you to come around to return to the plan, but you never did. And instead of asking why I just pulled away further, you didn't just pull, I corrected gently. You erased. There's not a single photo of my commissioning in this house. But Gregory's high school internship is framed in the hallway. He looked pained. I thought you didn't want that kind of spotlight. I wanted you to see me. A long pause. Then he stood again, walked to a drawer in the back cabinet, pulled out a small photo, faded, folded. I kept this, he said. The one Tiffany sent us. I just never knew where to put it. It felt like you didn't belong to the same frame as everything else in here. I took the photo. It was from my commissioning, me in uniform, standing proud hand raised in oath. Alone, except for Tiffany, just visible behind me. It felt like someone had taken a piece of silence and handed it back in color. Maybe it's time for a new frame, I said softly. He smiled, broken, but real. I don't know how to be the father you needed, he said, but I'm willing to learn, if you'll let me. And that landed harder than any order I'd ever received. Because it wasn't command, it wasn't control. It was the one thing I'd never expected, humility. I stood. He followed. And before I left the office, he said, "Colonel Moore." I turned. "I'm proud of you." I didn't reply. I just nodded once sharply like a salute and walked away. We hadn't sat at this table like this in years. Not really. Not without subtext. Not without roles assigned before a single word was spoken. Not without the quiet hierarchy of who mattered more. But tonight, there was something else in the air. Not peace, but the possibility of it. My mother had cooked again. Roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, cornbread, the same meal from the night I first told them I was joining ROTC. A silent callback, maybe an apology in her own language. She didn't speak much as we gathered, just moved with mechanical grace, placing dishes like someone performing a ritual. I walked in last, not in uniform, not in armor, just Eliza. Tiffany was already seated, her smile the first to reach me. "You made it," she said. "I always do," I replied. Gregory looked up briefly, then down. My mother gestured toward my old seat, not at the far corner, not the one I had migrated to over the years, but my actual place, across from her. A small thing, but deliberate. We served ourselves. The silence wasn't hostile, it was cautious, like a ceasefire declared but still holding breath. It was my mother who finally broke it. "Everything tasted better when you were home," she said softly. I glanced up. There was no sarcasm, no comparison, just a sentence that didn't hurt. "Thanks, Mom," I replied. "You always make too much cornbread." Her eyes shimmered with something between pride and guilt. "I didn't know what else to do," she admitted. "You were always so sure, even when I wasn't." Gregory put his fork down. "I used to think you ran away," he said suddenly, "that you couldn't handle this world, so you joined that one." He took a breath. But I was wrong. I was hiding, in a world that already favored me. I didn't speak. Let him keep going. "You didn't need applause. You built your value where no one handed it to you." I blinked. That was new. He looked up. "I'm sorry, Eliza." I nodded once, "And I'm glad you're still part of this family, even when we didn't deserve it." My mother finally sat down, fully, hands no longer busy, nowhere else to hide. "I read that article," she said, "the one with the photo from the launch. You looked important." "I was doing my job," I said. "You looked like someone people listened to," she added. "And I didn't know how badly I'd made you feel unheard." A pause. "You didn't ruin me, Mom," I said gently. "You just didn't fight for me when I needed it." Her voice trembled. I didn't know how. "I know." And somehow, those two words untied something between us. The conversation didn't become perfect. It wasn't a miracle. But somewhere between second helpings and soft laughter between Gregory telling a bad joke and my mother forgetting the salt, something shifted. No longer a table for comparison, but a table for recognition. We would never be who we were, but maybe, just maybe, we could be something new. 6 months later, I set the table in my DC apartment. The dining room was small but filled with light. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city's pulse. Faint car horns, amber streetlights, and a skyline that whispered, "You've arrived." Not to the top, but to peace. The roast was in the oven, wine breathing, apple pie cooling on the counter, my mother's recipe, or maybe mine now. Tonight wasn't a ceremony, it wasn't a surprise, it was just dinner. But this time they were coming to my table. Albert arrived first. He held a newspaper under his arm, carefully folded. His usual stiff gait softened as he stepped in. "I brought something for your wall," he said sheepishly. It was an article from Defense Journal, framed. "Colonel Eliza Moore leads cyber defense innovation." The photo showed me standing with General Grant and the Secretary of Defense. "I have a copy in my office," he added. "Thought you might want one too." I smiled. "Thanks, Dad." Diana came next. Still wearing a cardigan 2 decades old, but this time, she carried something more. A homemade pie. "I know it's not as fancy as yours," she said, placing it down, "but I figured I'd try again." "You didn't have to," I said softly. "I wanted to," she replied. Simple, honest. progress. Gregory arrived last Megan in tow. He didn't bring excuses. He didn't bring apologies. He brought wine and silence. And then I updated the interface code, used your sandbox logic. The team says it cut runtime by 18%. I raised an eyebrow. Did you tell them it was my logic? Eventually he grinned, but only after enjoying the praise for 5 minutes. I laughed. For the first time, it didn't hurt. We sat, not as strangers, not as adversaries, but as people trying again. The food passed easily. Conversation flowed not perfect, not always smooth, but real. We talked about the project, about new goals, even about Tiffany's engagement. No comparisons, no one-upmanship, just voices. As the evening waned, I raised my glass. I used to think all I wanted was recognition, I said. But maybe what I really wanted was understanding. They listened. This time they didn't interrupt. I spent years thinking I had to fight to be seen. Now I know I was always enough, whether you saw it or not. My mother wiped at her eye. My father nodded quietly. Gregory looked down, then up with something like pride. Later that night, I stood alone at the window. The city shimmered beneath me. My uniform hung neatly in the hallway. My past no longer heavy. I hadn't won. I hadn't conquered. I had simply become. And finally, they saw me, but more importantly, I saw myself.